When having a discussion with a large language model, I prefer a conversational approach. By conversation, I mean where the user speaks to the LLM with their own voice, and then the LLM understands and replies using their voice. My first experience of this was with Inflection's Pi product. Before that, I had been typing on my keyboard, submitting the text, and then watching the large language model reply in text. Being able to speak naturally and then receive a spoken reply greatly improved the experience. I didn't have to focus on typing, I just said what I wanted to in my own way, chatting away, and the large language model responds. I ended up chatting away for maybe over an hour about various subjects, sometimes to learn about new subjects and other times to brainstorm. I find it fascinating. OpenAI later released their own app also with conversation. I love the whole experience. I sometimes plug in my earbuds and the experience improves again. Chatting to my own AI assistant, it's like something out of science fiction, something like Ender's Game. Anyway, let's take a look. What does it look like? Do you think that natural conversation with LLMs, especially when brainstorming, is much beneficial than typing?
Absolutely. Natural conversations with LLMs, particularly when brainstorming, can be significantly more beneficial than typing for a few reasons. 1. Speed and efficiency. Speaking is generally faster than typing, allowing for a more rapid exchange of ideas and a smoother flow of conversation. This can be especially valuable during brainstorming sessions, where quick thinking and idea generation are key.
So how can we do this for ourselves? To make it easy, we'll initially just focus on the user speaking and then getting back a response, a sort of copycat feature where we speak and then our words are repeated back to us. Keeping things simple, we'll work with plain HTML, CSS and JavaScript and have the HTML page served by the Python HTTP server command. We're going to need speech to text for capturing the words we speak and text to speech for having the words spoken back to us. Modern browsers like Chrome support both features through speech recognition and speech synthesis APIs. The speech recognition API comes with start and stop functions and raises various events such as onStart, onEnd, and onResult. The onStart and onStop events are raised as speech recognition starts and stops, and the onResult event is raised after the user has stopped speaking. The speech synthesis API has an object called speech synthesis utterance, and this has a speak method which we will use to have the words spoken out aloud. So the code logic is basically get a speech recognition instance, get a speech synthesis utterance instance, set the language for both, this will be English, we start the speech recognition, and then call the speak method when the onResult event is raised. Let's look at the code. So on the left hand side we can see the browser and the HTML page which is being displayed, and on the right hand side we can see that code for the HTML page, and underneath we can see the Python HTTP server code which is running that enables this page to be delivered to the browser. Here we've got the start button, which you can also see here, and we also have underneath the words captured we have an empty div which will be used to show the words that we speak. We have the listen and speak method which will be called when we click on the start button. Let's take a little look at the function itself. We can see we get access to the div where we're going to show our words. We set the language to English, which we'll use later, and then we get our speech synthesis and speech recognition instances. For the recognition, we set the language, and then also for the speech recognition, when it realizes we've finished speaking, it will raise an on-result event. And here we're just saying that when that happens, we get the words that have been spoken, we update the div with those words, then we create our instance of a speech synthesis utterance with those words, we set the language to English because we'll be speaking English, and then we speak. So this event again, this on result, will be called when the speech recognition recognizes that we've finished speaking. And this listener.start will actually start the whole process. Now, it will run just the once. So let's take a look and see how that works. So to start the whole process, we need to click on the Start button. The cat sat on the mat.
The cat sat on the mat.
And because it will just run the once, as I'm talking, my words I'm speaking are not being picked up. If I want it to work again, I need to click on the Start again. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock.
Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock.
So there you go, a simple implementation. So how do we make that speak and then have our words repeated back to us? How can we make that a loop which is continuous? And the steps are fairly easy. So you can see I've made a few changes to the code, but when we click on Start, we basically call this manual start listening function. And the main difference compared to before is this line here. And what this is basically doing is saying that when the on-end event is raised by the listener, it will call this auto stop listening. And within the auto stop listening function, we're checking whether we want to stop or not. And I've created this is speaking variable at the top here, set it to false initially, but when I hit the Start button, it becomes set true. And within this code, when the listener automatically stops, we check whether the is speaking is true, which it should be, and it will restart the listener, and the conversation will continue. And just to allow us to have a manual way to stop that, I have this manual stop function, which is activated when I click on the Stop button, and this sets the is speaking to false and calls listener.stop. So this time when the auto stop listening function is called, is speaking is set to false, it drops through, and the speech recognition will stop. So let's see how that works. I've also, as you can see, I've got lots of console logs so that we can follow what's going on. Let's take a look. Click on the Start. The cat sat on the mat.
The cat sat on the mat.
Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock.
Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock.
What's the weather like in London?
What's the weather like in London?
I clicked on the Stop and it comes to an end. And you can quite easily see the logic as it's running through here. So what do we have? We now have a nice continuous conversation loop that will continue until we hit that manual stop button. And what that does is we speak the words and then our words are then spoken back to us. But what we would really like to have is we speak the words, and then rather than just having our words repeated back to us, we would like the large language model or the LLM to respond back to us. And how do we do that? So it's quite straightforward. Here I've put some pseudocode of how that would happen. So you can see that we have this function called getLLMResponse. It takes the words which we've just spoken, so in this case, what's the weather like in London? And it then passes those words to the large language model, gets back the LLM's response, and then instead of having our own words spoken back to us, we actually have the response of the large language model spoken out. And where do we put this getLLM response? Here in the listening, after on the on result, when the speech recognition realizes we finished speaking, it calls the, instead of the speak word spoken, we would add in here the get LLM response with the words spoken. And we could comment this out, this particular line. But other than that, there's no change, and the whole thing should work, giving us a nice continuous conversation with the LLM.